So let's get started. So first thing that everyone should probably know before we get to the other part is, what is Rojava? What exactly is this place? Well, Rojava, the word, is Kurdish for west, and Rojava, the sub-state entity, is the name for Western Kurdistan, the territory controlled by the SDF, which stands for the Syrian Democratic Forces, in the Syrian Civil War. The territory comprising Rojava stretches from Kamishlo and Kobani in the north, down to Manbij on its western border, down along the banks of the Euphrates, down to the border with Iraq, and also includes major cities like Raqqa and Hasakeh and Shadadi, and many others. What makes Rojava special in this civil war as a sub-state entity is that, unlike its neighbors that are radical Islamist terrorists, Rojava is basically a realization of the ideology expressed by Abdullah Öcalan, who I'm sure you people know as the man that was primarily responsible for founding the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party in Turkey. They started out as a Marxist-Leninist group that pushed for Kurdish independence from the Turkish state because they were constantly oppressed. And along the way, they kind of moved away from that Marxist-Leninist ideology and developed their own idea of democratic confederalism. And what is democratic confederalism? Well, it's best described as a libertarian socialist ideology. Democratic confederalism places a big emphasis on self-governing communities, so villages, cities, this, that, or the other, etc. The people in those villages participate in popular democracy and make the decisions for that village and how they want to address problems, this, that, or the other. It's basically self-governance by the people in those units. So that's sort of how governance plays out in general. Along with that, democratic confederalism places a huge emphasis on women's liberation. It is very deeply devoted to feminist thought. So a big thing in Rojava is the autonomy of women. Women have to have a certain percentage of representation in governing bodies. They have their own military units called the YPG. These are fully realized units. They are not there for decoration. They're not there to basically serve as propaganda. They are actual fighting units. And they go to the front and they have shaheeds and martyrs. And also this kind of translates into a certain number of customs and laws that are aimed directly at supporting women. So at least in the military units, men are not allowed to command women to do anything. They are not allowed to order them around, this, that, or the other. But the inverse is not true. So women can command men if they need to, but it usually doesn't happen. So that's one major aspect. So it's self-governance, feminism, and also it includes a strong commitment to the respect of racial minorities, religious minorities, this, that, or the other. It is not a Kurdish supremacist movement. All ethnic groups participate in the governing of Rojava. The Arab villages, like obviously the governing people in those villages consist of the people that live there, so obviously they're going to be part of it. Syrians are part of it, this, that, or the other. And also there's a strong devotion to secularism. So Salafist thought, like jihadist ideologies, this, that, or the other, are not welcome. It has its tradition in Marxist-Leninism, so that doesn't really come around. So yeah, that's a basic overview of what democratic confederalism is and what Rojava is. If you're wondering how this entity came about in the Syrian Civil War, well, I can give you a brief overview of the history of the Syrian Civil War. So as you all know, 2011, Arab Spring's going around. It hits Syria, and an armed opposition starts to come up and demand the resignation of Assad, the opening up of like the political process, this, that, or the other. Assad disagrees, unlike some other dictators in the Middle East, and so there's a war between mainly the pro-government forces and the opposition forces, which consist of a hodgepodge of different people, pro-democratic people, but also people like al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, this, that, or the other. They fight for several years. Things kind of tip against Assad, but then Russia intervenes and provides some help. And at this point, the entities that are the opposition or the Free Syrian Army are now on the retreat and about to be defeated. And also within those groups, they've mostly pushed out the pro-democratic forces. During this time, ISIS also comes into being and basically runs wild over the eastern part of Syria and the western part of Iraq and takes over a huge swath of territory and starts to threaten the Kurdish towns of Kobani and Kamishlo and several other villages along the border with Turkey. The locals in those towns decide that they are not going to die on their knees, so they take up their rifles, take up their RPGs, whatever munitions they have, and they stage a heroic defense of those cities. Eventually, the U.S. government catches wind that these Kurdish forces are fighting back against ISIS, which they perceive as a threat to national security. So a very unlikely partnership between these Kurds and the U.S. begins, and they begin providing logistical support, munitions, food, that sort of thing. They also provide airstrikes. They provide some of their military expertise, and they also start training the units. And from these little centers of resistance against the Islamic State, the Kurds push out and start reclaiming their territory. And then they eventually develop into an entity called the YPG, or the People's Protection Units. They get together, and with U.S. aid, they continuously push out the ISIS jihadists, start taking back territory, and then they start organizing the places that they liberated under the ideals espoused by Abdullah Öcalan, also known as Apo, who is currently in prison, if you are not aware. So yeah, they push out, they keep pushing out, and they've been doing this for several years now, from like 2014, 2013-ish, until the current time, and now they're pretty much a third of the northeast, or a third of Syrian territory located in the northeast, and they're kind of winding down. They're reaching the end of the civil war. Almost all the territory ISIS has claimed has now been taken back. There's only just a few pockets, and then there's only a few more Islamist groups left. So they're kind of winding down the civil war, and they're kind of holding their breath, wondering whether or not neighboring Turkey will invade, because they do consider them terrorists associated with the PKK. So that's the basic situation. That's kind of the basic background. I'm sure you guys probably knew most of that, or all of that. So with that being said, let's open up the floor right now to people to ask questions and basically just kind of get a dialogue starting. So if you just want to raise your hand, if you have a question, I'll call on you. And you go in the back. Oh, no, not at all, not at all. So with the YPG, specifically, if you are thinking of joining, if you're going to get in contact with YPG International and go over as an international volunteer, if you have any medications, that is fine. I knew one specific person that went over there that suffered from, I'm not sure what mental illness it was, but he suffered from psychosis, and he came over with a bunch of his meds for half a year, and they were fine with it. So that should be fine. Like, sir, I believe if you suffer from some kind of mental illness, but you are being treated for it, and it's not something that's like super debilitating or anything like that, I believe the YPG will be like, yeah, this is fine. I know of at least one person that did that. When you do get in contact, if you decide to go with the people that organize international volunteers, they will send you a very large questionnaire in the emails that they sent. And in this questionnaire, there are a ton of questions. mostly centering around your personal ideology, your attitudes towards Turkey, your attitudes towards the Syrian government, your own government, things of that nature, your background, like where you grew up, that sort of thing. And then they will also ask you about if you have a history of mental illness. Do you have any chronic conditions? Do you have a problem with drug abuse, alcohol abuse, things of that nature? But those are not disqualifying traits. So if you do have some kind of medical problem, don't feel like you wouldn't be able to go and do there. You can definitely do it if you are seeking treatment for that. So yeah. It depends on the medication, I would believe. It would be a bit hard. You have to keep in mind that this is a civil war, and material conditions are not very great. Supply lines can be cut off with little notice at any time by Turkey or the Kurdish regional government in Iraq or whatever. Yeah, if you are going and you do have medication for some kind of chronic illness or whatever, I would definitely recommend talking to your pharmacist about getting an advanced supply for that. And in the case of current volunteers that want to go over now, I would get it for at least 9 months. At least 9 months, because that is currently the minimum time you have to spend in Rojava if you decide to go. All right. Any other questions? And purple shirt. Right on. Yeah, so the healthcare system is, like it being sort of a tradition following the Marxist-Leninist sense, healthcare is very much socialized in Rojava. Any person that ends up getting sick or whatever, or they've got like a problem, there are hospitals in at least the major cities where they can go to, and these are run by the community. There's a lot of like education classes and things of that nature in these hospitals, where not only do they teach the locals about, say, first aid or whatever, but these villagers and stuff can go to these hospitals and get medicine free of charge. So it's a socialized model in that sense, and it's not really a socialized model like you'd see in Western European countries, where the medical sort of apparatus is controlled by the state, the high up government, the centralized government. It is something that's controlled by the people in the specific commune, village, city, whatever. Yes? So, like, do you mean like U.S. military personnel or? Right. Okay. All right. So, for the people on the ground right there, I would say the situation is very similar to what happened when I was over there and Turkey decided to invade Afrin. When that happened, there was a state of confusion, kind of. Like when you're over in Rojava, it's very hard to get news about the outside world. You're kind of like in a black hole of information. Like you just don't hear about anything aside from your immediate like locale. But when I was there, we were out on the front. We were trying to take Hajin, and then all of a sudden our commanders came up and they were like, "Oh, Turkey's invading." And at that point, they basically mobilized all the international volunteers. They brought them together, and they gave us two choices. We could either go to Afrin, or we could stay in the rest of Rojava and keep fighting ISIS instead of fighting Turkey. So that was what they did when I was there. I believe for the international volunteers, they 100% know. that this is about to go down. And what I would imagine is that a lot of the international units are probably mobilizing back up into the north in preparation for the inevitable invasion. And I would assume that the people handling the internationals in Rojava are probably getting in contact with some of the people and telling them, like, hey, this is about to happen. If you're not okay with it, you need to tell us so we can get you out of the country right now. Because, once they start invading, if they decide to invade, it's going to be difficult, in my opinion, to get out of the country. They'll probably try, the Turkish army will probably try and go into the KRG, the regional government in Kurdistan, and try and encircle the Kurds in Rojava. They already have Turkish presence in the northern part of Kurdistan already, and they get ambushed by PKK guerrillas all the time. So I think that's how it's going down. But from what I could tell from my friends that are still there right now, I would say they probably didn't feel too surprised. I think they knew that this was coming soon, but it definitely kind of put people at high alert, like, get ready, like, this is going to go down. All right.
So how can I best provide proxy support?
The material conditions in Rojava are pretty bad, obviously. It's a very poor region. It's been oppressed by the Assad government for a long time, and the war has obviously destroyed a lot of property and stuff. So what I would do, one thing that they really need a lot of is medical supplies in Rojava. A lot of people get sick there. A lot of people get wounded. And they're pretty, when I was there and I was messing with the medical stuff, like, we were pretty low on, like, tourniquets, bandages, sedatives, things of that nature. So what I would do to keep things legal and actually do, like, a good amount of help, I would look into the Red Crescent. They do a lot of good help there. They can get supplies into there and help people treat not only chronic illnesses, but they'll help get us supplies for traumatic injuries on the battlefield. I would look into MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières. That would be a good thing. Demand Utopia, that is here. They give a good amount of, they give their money to Rojava to try and cultivate like farming projects and things of that nature. So that's something that would help a lot. There's a bunch of different aid organizations that you can contact to, like, see if you can give, like, actual material support for Rojava. Yeah. That being said, just don't try to, like, contact the YPG directly and just give them money, because that is very illegal. So don't do that. Yes. State repression, well, when you go to Rojava, you are definitely going to get the attention of the alphabet soup agencies. NSA, FBI, CIA, this, that, or the other. I wouldn't say I necessarily faced repression from state agencies, but when you do get back, they do pull you aside at the airport, and they take you to an interrogation room, and they have you there for about an hour or so and try and get the deal on you. They try and figure out what kind of skills you learn there. They want to know if you are capable of making bombs, if you are capable of, I guess, staging like a guerrilla attack or something, you know. They want to assess if you are a threat. They want to see if you have the skills and you are in a mindset to go out and start doing random acts of terror. So they'll ask you about that. They will also ask you to snitch on certain people. So when I was there, they pulled up different pictures of volunteers that they thought were threats. And they asked me, hey, do you know this person? Do you know anything about him? Do you think he's a threat? This, that, the other. Interestingly enough, when I got back and had a talk with the DHS, They showed me a picture of this one volunteer that I had never met before. I had no idea what his name was. But they showed me this picture of this guy, and he had the normal military fatigues and like a hat and his rifle. But he had a tattoo on his face that said, "Kill them all." And I think that kind of spooked them a little bit. So they asked me about him, and I told them, I have no idea who this person is. I've never met him in my life. And they said, okay, well, when we talked to him after he came back, shortly before I did, he apparently had plans to go to Yemen and fight in that civil war. So good luck to him, I guess. I wouldn't get involved with that, but I think he was one of those adrenaline junkies. So who knows where he is right now? But yeah, they will pull you aside and they will do interviews. For me, I was able to convince them that I wasn't a threat, and they basically just kind of like said, "Okay, thank you for your time. Here's our number if you want us to, if you have a tip to give us or whatever." And then that was that. So that was like one interview I had with the DHS, and then I had another interview several months after that with the FBI, and they asked pretty much the same questions. So yeah, if you do decide to volunteer and you come back, do expect to be questioned. Do expect for them to spy on you. They are definitely taking information from your IP about what websites and shit you visit and this, that, or the other. They're probably in contact with your cellular provider, getting texts that you send to people. But it's not something like, there's no intimidation or anything like that. They don't harass you at work or things like that. They just kind of keep it on the down low. But it's a lot better here than in European countries. If you're a European and you go over and fight in Rojava, more than likely if you come back, you're violating some terror laws in your home country, and you'll probably face criminal charges. Pretty much every British person that I met over there, when they came back, they had their passports taken, and legal charges are pending against a lot of them. The cases will probably either get thrown out, at my guess, or they'll be found not guilty, but we'll see. Okay, you. So I can speak a lot about how justice works within the military system. Outside of the military system, it's a bit foggier for me. And the reason for that is because a lot of the military volunteers, unless they specifically want to go to the civilian sector, they're mostly going to be segregated away from that sort of life. So you will spend most of your time out on the front and fighting ISIS, and then maybe after a month of being in that area, if you want to, you can ask the commander hey, can we go to the city so we can have a rest or whatever, and they'll be more than happy to accommodate you. But justice, at least within the military that I saw, was it was kind of interesting. A lot of it kind of comes down to the justice system. A lot of the times, within our units, comes down to the military commanders, and to a lesser extent the members in the group. So for example, during my time there, it's a fact of this war and a fact of the SDF, but there are a lot of conscripts in our forces, and a lot of these conscripts are scared and they don't want to go fight, which is totally reasonable. I can understand that. And a lot of these people, they will either try to self-harm in such a way that they don't have to go, or they'll just straight up desert. And a lot of the times they get caught. And what happens after they get caught is the commander will basically kind of just take an executive action, and they'll place that person under house arrest. So at whatever house that we'd have taken over or like we're occupying at that time, a lot of the times any of the deserters or people caught looting or committing violence against the civilian population or doing something bad, we'll have those people locked in a room, and then the commander will deliberate over that and come to like a sort of like they'll come up with an idea for punishment, and if they're a good commander, they'll run that by like the other members of that specific tabor or that unit. A lot of the times with the people that desert or whatever, obviously sending them back to the front line is a mistake, especially if they've already been injured. So a lot of the times they'll face prison for like X amount of time, and then they'll probably be sent back to the military units. But justice is a little bit oblique for me. Like different things in the civilian sector are a little bit of a mystery because you wouldn't really see it too much. But from what I know, people that end up getting caught with doing crimes, like stealing, assault, whatever, the police will arrest them and they'll hold them in like a jail cell. And during that process, if that person is like in any town in the SDF, there's like a good chance that that person will end up being a conscript, which is like, it's kind of iffy. Like, I kind of have mixed feelings about that. Obviously, I don't really want to draft people, especially people that committed crimes or anything like that. But at the same time, the SDF is facing existential threats from all around. So it's sort of like you kind of have to do some kind of morally questionable stuff in order to ensure your survival. But a lot of the people that we met as conscripts, especially as we were pushing into Hajin, a good amount of them were people that committed some kind of petty crime and they got sent there. But yeah, other than that, I think criminal justice is mostly handled by the city councils, by the communes, and it's a community kind of decision. So when you go there, this is what I would tell you to expect, so you can better prepare yourself for the language obstacles. Just assume nobody speaks English, because almost nobody does. During my time there, I think there were a grand total of like 5 Kurdish people that I met, Kurdish and Arabic people that could speak English. And a lot of them don't, like out of those people, like a lot of them are very shaky with their knowledge of English. There was one guy in particular that said he spoke English, but when he talked, he basically just said gibberish, like he would just say random words. And that was kind of disappointing because Kurdish is a very difficult language, a very difficult language. The grammar rules are a lot different. Well, that's the main thing. The grammar rules are a lot different, at least when you're like learning a Romance language or a Germanic language. There's a lot of words in those languages that closely mirror words in English. In Kurdish, that is almost never true. So it's kind of hard to remember different nouns and stuff in that way. So my advice to people that are thinking about going to Rojava is start getting familiar with Kurdish now. If you can find some Kurdish speakers in Seattle, which I think probably ain't going to be hard, there's probably plenty here, probably more than a lot of places in the country. If you know one of them, just say, hey, I want to practice Kurdish. Can you spend a little bit of time per day just to kind of converse and let me practice what I learned? And also, there's plenty of resources online. I personally got some PDFs from the people that were organizing Utopia International, and they sent it to me, and I studied those PDFs. There's PDFs on the Utopia International website that you can download, and I use those to study. And basically just go through that and familiarize yourself with the rules and the different words and things of that nature. But in order to get conversant in Kurdish. It does take a lot of practice if English is your primary language. So definitely, if you're thinking about going over, start now. Start practicing now. It will help you a lot. And if you can, if you manage to have enough room for multiple languages, also learn Arabic, because Arabic is very important. The majority of the fighters that were there only spoke Arabic, which was a bit of a problem because I only studied Kurdish. And they didn't speak Kurdish at all either. So there was huge communication barriers. So definitely learn that if you are considering going over, because it might save your life for real. Okay, you. So the general feeling that I got from the people that I fought with, like the militants there, is that they like the Western volunteers. They like it. They like it when you come over. Like they think it's very awesome that you're willing to put your life on the line to fight for them. As long as you go over there and you're sincere about wanting to fight, and you kind of put your dumb first world problems away and just like not cause trouble for the units, they will be very appreciative of your effort to be here. I knew a lot of people. I feel like sometimes the Western volunteers can kind of give a bad rap for us because there are a lot of Western volunteers, way too many, that go over there and they have this idea of what it's going to be like, and how the reality is so much different from what they expected that they freak out and basically say after like a month or 2 months that I need to go home. And that causes a lot of problems for the people that are organizing the internationals coming over. So I would definitely say that in general, they like the Western volunteers, like they appreciate that. But if you definitely cause trouble for them, that attitude can probably change over time. And if you just go over there, just realize, you're going into a civil war. Like, you're not going to be able to enjoy a lot of the things that you take for granted here, and just kind of like accept that and learn to work around that instead of like freaking out and causing a bunch of problems and yelling at Kurds and this, that, or the other, and just causing them problems. They have enough problems as it is, but yeah, they generally like the Western volunteers. Yes. Well, in my mind, there's the next bit of fighting is probably going to be in the Kurdish areas if Turkey decides to invade. And I believe if that happens, a lot of the fighters are going to be Kurdish. So since the fight is probably going to be against Turkey, I would say Kurdish is going to be more important going forward. There's going to be way less fighting in the Arabic areas, like specifically Deir ez-Zor, just because the operations there are pretty much 99% complete. There is a very, very small pocket of Daesh resistance that is still there. I think it's only like 50-something square kilometers in size, so it's very, very small. And that's probably going to be completely annihilated within the next couple of months. So by the time you get there, there's not going to be really any operations down there. They're going to send you back up to the north. So I would say Kurdish is more important going forward. So it's kind of a mixture of both. So thing to keep in mind is that they are not like a professional military like the U.S. military, the British or whatever, that put an incredible amount of resources into their recruits. The SDF is a militia. So when you get into Syria for the very first time, you get taken to a place called the Academy. Formerly it's called Shahid Kamal Academy. And you'll go there, and then shortly after arriving, you will start your military training, and training is for 1 month. which is a lot less than our counterparts in the U.S. military, British military, French military get. So it's a 1-month crash course, and it's divided into two-week segments. The first 2-week segment is all about the actual revolution itself. So you will spend the majority of your time during the day learning about the history of YPG and PKK and Abdullah Öcalan and those sort of things. You'll learn about their conception of history. You will learn about the ideology itself, so how things are organized on the political level. And then you will also have your Kurdish lessons. You will have 2 weeks of intensive Kurdish lessons. And it's more or less just kind of one guy writing words on the board and then you like repeating them and then him just like talking to you and trying to work it out that way. Which is why I tell people, if you can learn Kurdish right now, do it. And you're thinking about going, do it right now. Start. After those 2 weeks of doing those classes and doing PT and doing guard duty in the middle of the night, you'll have a day off to rest, which you will definitely need because you're pretty much going 24/7. You'll get very little sleep. You'll probably get about like 4 hours of sleep a night, something like that, in that ballpark. You'll get a day off, and then the next 2 weeks is military training. So you will begin to learn how to use your rifles. You'll learn how to fire a Kalashnikov. You'll learn how to shoot the PKM-like machine gun. You'll learn how to handle RPGs, grenades, things like that. And sniper rifles, forgot about that. And then you will also be learning about military tactics. So there's a lot of exercises about moving in formation, what to do when you get ambushed, this, that, or the other, what to do during patrols, how to sneak up and ambush enemies, things of that nature. And that was pretty fun. That's the more physical aspect, and I like that more. You get to do all sorts of fun little exercises like trying to sneak up on your friends and hit them with rocks and things like that. But yeah, that's basically training. After 4 weeks, it's done. They'll give you an evaluation of how well you did in the academy and what you need to work on. A big aspect of democratic and federalism is the tech mill, or the criticism. We can talk about those in a little bit if people run out of questions or if people want to talk about it right now, you know. But yeah, that's basic training. You just do a month and then they send you right up to the front line. I got done with my 1 month training and they immediately sent me to Raqqa, which is like going from like Super Mario World like 1-1 and then immediately going to Bowser's Castle. So that was something. In the back? Right on. So for Turkey, they will have full air support. So the Turkish mercenaries in the Al-Bab region and now Afrin, they'll have Turkish jets dropping bombs on the SDF positions, which is not good. Very not good, because we do not really have much in the way of anti-air capability. The U.S. didn't really supply us with that because our main adversary was ISIS, and they don't really have an air force, minus like those little Amazon drones that they put bombs on and then drop on your head. But yeah, they didn't give us AA, and since Turkey is a NATO ally, if Turkey begins bombing us, the U.S. is not going to use their AA capability to shoot down those jets. That would be tantamount to an act of war, and that would be no good, at least if you asked like the Pentagon, like all those generals and people working in the State Department. So once Turkey invades, I don't think U.S. aircrafts are really going to provide bombing missions against the Turkish-backed rebels. I think they are going to stand back. They only want to give us air support for fighting ISIS. They don't want to give us air support for fighting Syria, the Syrian government. They don't want to give us air support for fighting the Turkish-backed rebels or like any organized like nation state. So in the case of a Turkish invasion, things are going to be real bad. It's going to be a very, very tough fight, and the odds are not going to be in our favor. So it's a little scary. Yes? Right on. So compared to a lot of the other rebel groups, the diplomatic corps of the SDF is more sophisticated. At this current moment, the SDF is engaging in ongoing talks with the Syrian government. They're talking with Assad right now because they realize that they are not going to have U.S. support forever. I think they realized that beforehand because they're not idiots. But they have been talking for several years, actually, with the Assad government and coordinating their operations and how they are going to retake territory back from these jihadist groups like ISIS and Hayat al-Sham and this, that, or the other. So their diplomatic corps is doing a lot of work with Assad right now. They're doing a lot of work with their Russian benefactors and trying to talk to them about setting up autonomy in the Kurdish regions of Rojava, and how the current sort of sub-state of the SDF will integrate back into the Syrian nation state, and what will happen to all these militias and stuff that are under our banner. So it seems like, from what I've read, that the SDF will basically just be kind of like an autonomous part of a federated Syria, and the YPG and a lot of the other militias will then join the Syrian Arab Army to police that area and also to protect the border with Turkey, because as you probably all know, they've had a lot of problems with Turkey and their aggression against Syria and the SDF. So that's kind of what the general diplomatic situation is in Damascus. When it comes to peace talks, unfortunately, the SDF has kind of been excluded from certain summits. Sometimes, usually this is part of a scheme by Turkey or whatever to just exclude them and just be like, no, we're not negotiating you. We are going to eradicate you because you are a part of the PKK, which is doing this, that, or the other in Turkey. So it's kind of an uphill struggle a little bit in that arena to gain recognition from the different players. But pretty much everybody involved in that civil war, they treat the SDF as a major part of that. They obviously, because they control 1/3 of the country at the moment. I think it's unlikely. I don't really see a reason for them to be antagonistic towards them, because it seems like they're willing to negotiate with them and give them certain concessions so that they can maintain their autonomy. And I think that the government in Syria is really just wanting to wrap this up, because they have faced a lot of devastation from this war. They've just basically become a completely militarized country. Everything in Syria has the economy has warped to be completely devoted to this struggle. So I don't really think they want to waste the manpower or the resources to really go after the SDF and get rid of them right now, because I don't think they see them as a threat at the moment. Yes? Right. So yeah, they are called the Peshmerga. That's the name for the general name for all the Kurdish forces in northern Iraq at the moment. And relationships between, let's say, Rojava, the PKK, Rojalat, and the actual Kurds that live in Iraqi Kurdistan is mostly good. If you talk to your average Kurdish citizen in northern Iraq about whether they support Rojava, whether they support the PKK, or whatever organization, they'll probably say like, yes, Biji, YPG, Biji, PKK, this, that, or the other. So the general population is generally supportive. The Kurdish governments in northern Iraq are kind of noteworthy, though, because those organizations are ideologically quite different from Rojava, the PKK, Rojava, that sort of thing. The governments in that area are pretty conservative. They're pretty traditionalist. They're pro-capital, this, that, or the other, which obviously puts them a little bit into conflict with Rojava and the other Kurds within these organizations. But the government really doesn't crack down on entities like the PKK within their own borders. With Rojava, they constantly have, say, U.S. supply lines constantly going into Rojava to provide them with munitions. If you're staying at the academy, it's very common to just look out towards the road and see just a long convoy of trucks with Guardians, Humvees, whatever, just come on in. So it's not like they're embargoing them and just really putting the screws on them economically. There's a deal of cooperation, but the governments in those regions are a little bit ambivalent towards the Rojava Revolution and those other organizations, just because they differ a lot in terms of ideology. But again, these are Kurdish independence movements, and they are Kurds, and they are interested in a Kurdish nation state. So it's like they kind of line up in terms of goals. And another thing to add to that is that when Turkey sent word that they were planning on invading Rojava, I believe I heard that Iraqi Kurdistan was looking to send aid to the SDF and the fighters there. Because, they're not really interested in Turkey renewing their imperialist program, trying to revive that old Ottoman Empire. So it's complicated. It's complicated. Yes. They are still a terrorist organization, and the U.S. still considers them a terrorist organization, and I'm pretty sure every NATO country does too. Which makes the Rojava situation very unique because, obviously the U.S. is currently materially helping out the YPG, but the YPG is very closely tied to the PKK. They're almost the same organization. So it's kind of like the U.S. is giving weapons to people they consider terrorists, which is not new for them. They do that all the time. But it's a little weird. Like, if you look at it from a very critical angle and you don't take the surface level reading, it's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What's that? Oh, yeah. Yeah, the PKK and the YPG, like I said, they're very similar. They cooperate a lot. They're basically tied together at the waist. And they have the same ideology as the PKK. So the PKK is 100% behind the ideas of Abdullah Öcalan, their former leader. They're into the idea of democratic and federalism. The YPG is too. And their ultimate goal is to basically have a stateless civilization all around the world. Just dissolving all those nation states and having communal existence, like self-governance, this, that, or the other. Yeah. Let's go with you.
So, can I ask, I know you said you were mostly in the military and you were separate from the civilian life, but I do have other questions about civilian life for you to have some idea.
Oh, yeah. I'll answer it as best as I can, but it's a little cloudy to me because we were a bit segregated from that.
Yeah. Is there money?
Yeah, there's money. They use Syrian pounds. Yeah. They use Syrian pounds, and a lot of what I saw in Syria was that there's a lot of, I wouldn't say like a barter economy, but I didn't really see any spaces where I saw capitalist exploitation as outlined in like, you know, traditional socialist text. I didn't really see anything that looked like a boss and employee relationship. A lot of the people that have shops there or run farms or this, that, or the other, a lot of it seems like they are kind of just run by a family. So like just that family will say, for example, run a kebab shop or something, or a shawarma shop, or a little farm or whatever. And then also there are the cooperatives, the communes that you can find in Rojava, where it's like a bunch of workers that have self-organized into this unit and, I don't know, find a patch of land and decide to farm it up and share the bounty of that between them. But yeah, there's still money. We haven't gotten rid of the monetary system yet in Rojava, but give it time and we'll see. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so the second was more economic. Like, what I was curious, what kind of like aside from agriculture, like what kind of industries are there?
Right on. So for the conscript question, it's kind of hard to gauge how many of the people there are actual conscripts and didn't sign up voluntarily. A lot of the conscripts that you meet, that you can kind of guess are conscripts, are going to be Arabic speakers, and I didn't speak Arabic, so it was very difficult to communicate with them. But you could still like see them get arrested and put in house arrest, and this, that, or the other. And within the units, like it was a good chunk of people that would be put in house arrest at any given time. So usually at any given time, there'd be like maybe like 3 or so people that are under house arrest and waiting to just be taken somewhere else so that they can deal with it and figure out what they're going to do. Units are typically like about like 20 people or so. And in the area, there's like several of those units. So the number of people that got caught deserting wasn't super high, but it was significant. And I mean, like a lot of the times you would have like people. Well, I wouldn't know because I didn't speak Arabic, but I had people come to me and say like, hey, you know, I had this experience. I was talking to this guy, and he asked me what the best way to shoot himself in the foot would be so that he doesn't have permanent injuries or whatever. So yeah, there's that. So the economic question, what other industries are in Rojava? It is primarily like agriculture, and there's a lot of service industries popping up, at least in the cities. So there are a lot of restaurants. There are a lot of tailors, a lot of people making clothes and stuff, a lot of people that sell, there's a lot of military hardware that comes into the country. So there's a lot of people that take that and sell it either to the Kurdish and Arabic soldiers or more oftenly like us. So there's that. A lot of people will buy finished goods that come from other parts of the area. There's a huge industry in like people getting like Turkish-made goods and bringing them into Rojava and selling it. So a lot of the times when you go to the shops, you'll see a lot of like snack cakes, you know, foodstuffs, like toys and things like that, and they'll have like Turkish writing on it, and clearly are from Turkey. So there's that. A lot of animal husbandry, but it's mostly agrarian, and I feel like that's a consequence of sort of the Assad regime's historical plan for that region. Historically speaking, it has been like the breadbasket of Syria. There were very large farming initiatives developed in that region to try and like farm grain and this, that, or the other if you drive through Rojava, you will see sort of relics of that. You will see these enormous granaries that are like many, many stories tall. And an unfortunate aspect of that is that while this was happening, Assad was doing a bit of internal displacement for the Kurds. He was bringing in Arabic farmers and taking land from traditionally Kurdish farmers that had been in that region, which is very unfortunate. And it kind of worries me because I have a feeling that they will try and resume some of those Ba'athist policies. You know, it'll be harder for them, but it's not impossible for them. I mean, they will get some degree of autonomy. I feel like if they reach an agreement with Damascus, but Assad's kind of holding all the cards here, so it's very precarious. In the back. Right on. To supply yourself with an adequate kit, it's kind of hard to gauge. So I would say maybe like a couple $100. Maybe you don't really need to spend too much on military equipment. Getting a good pair of boots is very awesome. Definitely bring a good pair of boots. Some of the military hardware is kind of like not really super necessary. If you can get a good scope for your rifle, that's helpful. But you can get scopes from your international tabor commander. I believe pretty much all volunteers are being forced to go into Utopia International, the international tabor, unless you're going to IFB or whatever. And they are well supplied for military equipment. They have thermal scopes. They have night vision scopes, night vision goggles. They've got, if you don't want to use the AK-47, they've got M16s and this, that, or the other. They got plenty of grenades, that sort of stuff. But yeah, I would say some stuff that you need to get on your own and won't be supplied by the tabors is a good pair of boots. You need to get a good pair of boots. If you need to replace your shoes, they're going to give you some very crappy shoes, and they're not good at all. So get a good pair of boots so you don't twist your ankle. Get a multi-tool. A multi-tool is very, very useful. You can use it to do all sorts of stuff, like cut stuff, snip this, do that. It helps a lot with cleaning because disassembling your gun when you're cleaning it, especially if you get a new gun, is very difficult because things are kind of like sticky and stuck and takes a lot of force. So that's very helpful. You can use that in a lot of situations. A good knife will be useful, not necessarily to stab people, but to cut up food. That's something that you definitely want, and you definitely want a knife that is clean. So let's see, a knife. Yeah, if you can get a scope, that'll be good, but that's not really necessary. Anything else? If you can get plates, that's also pretty good. If you can get a good rack into there, that's awesome. If you are thinking about buying that military equipment, though, I would recommend buying it once you get into Iraqi Kurdistan, because if the security agents see you walking in with that and they scan your bag when you're coming into Soleimani Airport, and they get suspicious, they'll put you aside and they might deport you, which is unfortunate. So yeah, I would say a couple $100 for that if you're thinking about coming in super well stocked. And also make sure you have enough money for a plane ticket, both there and back. Some people, they end up going there and for whatever reason, they might have an emergency and they have to fly back before their 9 months is over. And if you do that, the EPIGET will not be happy. You'll have to provide for your own flight. And you don't want to be stranded in Iraq, so make sure you have enough money to get back home. Let's see, you. Right. My short-term goals are just sort of like trying to convince people that the current system we are living under is flawed. It's not working. and it's gonna cause a lot of pain in the future if we do not change to a more sustainable model that you see in places like Cuba or Rojava or whatever. So right now my short-term goals are to try and basically win people over to the idea of like anarchism, democratic confederalism, some kind of left-leaning ideology like that. Further left than liberal, obviously. But yeah, I would say my long-term goals are just to mostly prevent complete environmental collapse from climate change, and you know, a socialist world, basically. Just try and get people on board with that.
We should take up arms against this country now.
In the back. They're not really analogous to police here. Police here, their primary goal is obviously to protect wealth and protect the elite. They say they are here to protect and serve, but putting on that facade of actually helping communities and stuff like that is a very minor goal of what they're about. So the police here, from what I see, is that they are primarily involved with suppressing the local populations. If there's any unrest, they're there to suppress it, especially like left-wing movements, almost exclusively left-wing movements. The Asayish in Kurdistan are not really like that. They're kind of like a police force, but they're pretty much only involved with like doing checkpoints on the roads, like checking to make sure that ISIS people are not sneaking bombs or hazardous materials or whatever from their front lines into the town so that they can commit terror attacks. So they're kind of like, they're sort of like doing like a little bit of anti-terror sort of routines, but they mainly are just sort of like checkpoint guards. They just hang out in checkpoints and they just make sure people that are coming to places and back to places are not ISIS terrorists. But that being said, most of the anti-terror sort of operations and the counterinsurgency operations are done by the HAT. I can't remember what that is in Kurdish right now, but those are basically the anti-terror units, and they go through a good amount of training. They're like pretty highly trained, and I guess they're kind of like the Navy SEALs or whatever of Rojava, the special forces. Yes?
So the Asayish are not analogous to a police force, and they're doing roadblocks mostly. Like, are there police in any of these cities and towns?
I believe police work and like justice is mostly done by, like, it's sort of like a community involvement. There are like specific police units. I'm trying to remember the specific acronym they have, but they aren't Asayish. They have like a different specific name. It's like something HXP or something like that. I can't remember. But like it's a separate organization that does policing in the cities. Yes.
How often do they use ghillie suits over there?
Never. We don't have any ghillie suits. In the areas that I was fighting in, there's not a lot of foliage. Like there's not a lot of grasses and stuff like that. It's completely flat, like plains and deserts. So you're gonna stick out like a sore thumb if you're walking around in a Wookiee suit. So yeah, no ghillie suits. The Kurds would probably be like, "This is too heavy. I don't want to wear it." They think everything's too heavy. Like their philosophy when they are fighting is go in as light as possible. So no body armor for them. Just probably like a Kalashnikov and maybe like a couple of magazines and a couple of grenades. That's it. Yes. Right. Well, I mean, any revolutionary movement is going to have some aspects of it that don't live up to your expectations. I will say when it comes to LBGT rights, they are lacking. It's not that they actively oppress these people. They are not dragging them in the streets and shooting them in the head, thankfully. But they basically deny they exist in Rojava, which is very unfortunate. I talked to one guy, and that topic came up, and I think what he said summed up everybody else's attitudes about it very well. He basically said, like, oh, you know, gay people, lesbians, this, that, or the other, there's nothing wrong with them. They're fine. But they don't exist in Rojava. That's what he said, verbatim. Which kind of made me tilt my head a little bit, like, I think you're wrong. So they definitely need to, like, sort of get on that level, like, get kind of into that. But it's like with the feminist aspect of democratic and federalism, like, they didn't just pop up and they were like, oh, we're super feminists or whatever. You know, the feminist aspect of democratic and federalism was only possible due to a lot of hard work by the leaders in the PKK to kind of like make this thing acceptable. Like the idea that women will be fighting, that women will be complete comrades, and they got to fight, and that you got to give them respect. You can't talk to them in a traditional patriarchal way. You can't, you know, harass them sexually, this, that, or the other. So they got work to do with that. I feel like some of the foreign volunteers might be making an impression when it comes to that, because a lot of the ideologically driven foreign volunteers definitely come in there and they are pro those rights. And they talk with those people and will try and convince them. So hopefully in time they'll kind of like get past that. But you're working against like thousands and thousands of years of tradition. So got to do what you got to do. Yes. Okay, aside from material shortage, is anything internally that can mess with them? I'd say like within the SDF, there's a lot of heterogeneity when it comes to like ideology. So you have a lot of people that are in there that have like different conceptions of like what is like right in the world and what's worth fighting for. Like you've got anarchists. You've got people that are full cadre, like full democratic confederalism. You've got some communists, especially in IFB. You got a lot of Turkish communists in there, and they differ ideologically from the democratic confederalists, obviously. And then also you still have a lot of people that hold on to a lot of traditionalist beliefs, especially in some of the newly liberated areas in the South. I met a person that was a Salafist. I don't know what he was doing there. He was on the wrong side. I think what happened was he saw the winds were changing, and he was like, I'm backing off. I saw one guy, I don't really know what his ideology was, but he really loved ISIS Nasheeds, and he loved their propaganda videos. So I was worried he was going to kill me in my sleep. But the point is, like, there's a lot of different belief systems within the SDF, and the Democratic Confederalist ideology basically makes it so that these are de facto tolerated. Like, they self-organize and this, that, or the other. There's not really a centralized government like you would see in the Soviet Union or wherever that would potentially like crack down on these dissidents. So I think that's a little bit of a problem. I think there might be some friction between the more traditionalist Arabic areas and the Kurdish regions. And I don't know, it might lead to some conflict. It's going to make it hard to really get rid of those ISIS insurgents in those liberated areas because people will be sympathetic to them. Some of them will. But I think that's going to be a source of strife. I can't really think of anything that would in my mind, cause a source of strife that's not like food shortages or whatever.
What role did you see religion playing in, sort of the life of people you met in Rojava?
So I think for that question, I think we should differentiate between how religion plays in the lives of the ethnic Kurds and the ethnic Arabs. So for the ethnic Kurds, especially for people that are full cadre, that are big, high members in the Utopia, there's definitely this kind of culture of, I guess, secularism or atheism. Like a lot of those people, if you ask them, they'd probably just to conform with tradition in that area say, like, a lot of them will say, oh, I'm a Sunni or whatever. But in practice, they're very secular. Religion takes a very unimportant role in their life. They're more devoted to the ideology that governs the SDF and not to any religious mantra. But at the same time, it's like I said, saying that you're not religious in that part of the world is something that you just don't do. You need to have some kind of creed. The concept of atheism is just kind of questionable. For most of the Arabs, they're a bit more religious than the Kurds. Most of them are Sunni. And then aside from that, some of the other ethnic minorities, the Assyrians, a lot of them are Christians. A lot of the Kurds even, they'll be Yazidi. They'll follow the Yazidi faith. And some of them are kind of just getting back into Zoroastrianism. I've found that there's a lot of people, especially on online communities, that kind of harken back to those Zoroastrian traditions, but they won't actually be Zoroastrian. And they'll kind of use that as sort of like a proxy for their Kurdish heritage, like something that's special about them. And those are just the general things that I saw in society. Okay, yes?
What was your role over there in your unit and any successes that you felt you had over there?
Right on. So in my unit, our roles were mostly homogenous. We were all basically had the same responsibilities. I was just a foot soldier for I would say the first half of my time there. So I was basically just a gunner, like a guy with a Kalashnikov and some grenades or whatever. As time went on, my role became a bit more specialized. And as I joined Utopia International, I went from being the just ordinary Kalashnikov guy to being the Big C operator. The Big C is a light machine gun. It's the name that they give the PKM, Russian light machine gun. So they tasked me with carrying around that huge chunk of metal everywhere on patrols and stuff like that. Probably because I was one of the stronger people in the unit and I could carry that stuff for however many kilometer hikes we were going on. And that was more or less my specialization. Let's see, our victories, some that I'm particularly proud of. I was proud of a lot of the stuff we did coming up to Hajin, the last stronghold of ISIS territory. When we were heading towards the last bastion of ISIS strength, we were just basically taking villages left and right. They were in full retreat, and we were just absolutely crushing resistance. And I was proud of that because we would go into villages and free them, and the civilians would come back and they would cheer for joy and say, "Oh, yay, thank you," and then do the little peace sign. Because we got rid of these gangsters, basically, these violent gangsters. So that's what I'm particularly proud of. I'm also proud of being a part of the Siege of Raqqa and finishing that up. We managed to encircle their last stronghold, which was in a hospital, and force them to surrender. So that was very nice. We managed to, they took a bunch of civilian hostages, and we managed to get them out. In exchange, we had to take those ISIS fighters and send them back to the remaining pockets of resistance in Deir ez-Zor, but that's very normal. Yeah, I think those are some things I was particularly proud of. Any more questions in the back?
Water, and what do people use for water purification?
Oh, so we didn't really have to worry too much about water purification because aid was being sent in, and part of that aid was bottled water. So we always had like some kind of clean water for us to drink. And then like for washing ourselves and our clothes and stuff like that, there would be just a large water truck that would come by, and oftentimes we would commandeer houses from ISIS, and they would have large water tanks either on the side or on top, and that would provide us with water. We had a surprisingly large amount of water while we were there. We were in the middle of the desert, and I would never suffer from dehydration or anything like that, which is great. So contact with home is very difficult, especially if you're spending a lot of time in the front. When you're spending a lot of time in the front, there is zero internet access. They have internet, they have satellite internet, but that is reserved for the commanders so that they can coordinate like their movements and their operations and this, that, or the other. So they say, hey, you can't use this, all right? We don't want you to download like Superman or whatever, and use up all our bandwidth. So for most of the time, like when I was there would be like month-long stretches of just not being able to contact the outside world and not be able to use the internet to see what was happening in the world, this, that, or the other. And it wasn't too difficult. Like you get used to it, but you definitely felt its absence. Like you were like, oh damn, like I can't just like stare at my phone all day and fuck around on Facebook or whatever. Like letters? Well, I never tried to write a letter. I had no hope of doing that, but if you are there and you find some American military personnel, I knew of some people that tried to send letters back home through them, and I think they were successful. But they're about to leave, so that's not really an option. Yes? So yeah, it's kind of weird talking with the American military personnel that you would see on different like bases and stuff like that. If you tried to talk to them, like you needed to barter for something with them, like you wanted to get MREs or what have you in exchange for ISIS coins that you found, they'll be more than happy to like do that. And I mean, they're cordial enough. But they're very serious. Like they're going to keep their conversations very brief. They're going to get to the point. They're not going to do like friendly chit chat or whatever. If you are talking to them, you better have a reason for doing it. Otherwise, they'll probably ignore you. So it's like very weird. It's kind of like talking to the cops in some way, where they put up this like very serious demeanor, like we're getting to the point of everything. No idle chit chat. But they were nice enough, Yes. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Well, at least for me and like my trauma, I'm definitely very open to talking about it. Like it definitely helps if I talk to people about like some of the bad stuff I saw, like the injuries and that sort of thing. But I definitely feel like international volunteers, I think there's a point of like contrast between American volunteers in the Yepiget and American volunteers in the U.S. military. I feel like the volunteers in the U.S. military become much more, it's much easier for them to become disillusioned with the American project that they kind of had a conception for. Like a lot of them go over and they have this idea that they are liberating people. They're bringing democracy to these countries and helping to make better life for them. And a lot of them obviously come back and they're like, no, this is obviously an act of imperialism. There's a good many of good Havals that were ex-military, and that experience changed them, and they became socialists. They became Marxists, things like that. With Yepigat International, or with Yepigat volunteers, I feel like a lot less of them are kind of like disillusioned with the way like the revolution is being carried out, and I think that helps a good bit to keep them from sliding into like depression and this, that, or the other. But there's a good amount of PTSD, I feel like, with like some of the Yepigat volunteers. I know I'm probably suffering from it a little bit. It hasn't really affected my life, but I often think back on like some of the more gruesome things that I saw, and it kind of like consumes my thoughts, and it's just like it's very distracting, and I have to watch out if I get in like an altered state of conscious, like I get drunk or whatever. Like I stopped drinking because of that, because I would get into altered states of consciousness, and these bad feelings would come back up, and I was like, this sucks. So, but yeah, we suffer some of the same trauma that they go through. We suffer some of the same mental illnesses. Mm-hmm. Yes? No, not really. No, no, nothing like that. I don't think I committed too many war crimes, so. No, nothing like that. Yepigat doesn't really like you talking too much about like the kind of munitions they have and stuff like that. I took some pictures of some of the things that they had over there, and when I was trying to leave, they kind of deleted them. And I remember one case of a volunteer that took pictures of anti-tank missiles and posted it on Facebook, and like, oh, check this out, this is cool. And they got pissed and kicked him out, and it's very unfortunate. Don't give up intel to the enemy, guys. There's a lot of Turkish Facebook trolls. Be careful. Yes. Well, if you're talking about organization, there weren't really too many lessons we got there, because everything was pretty much organized. Like, it was already organized. Like, a lot of the places are already organized into communes. And even the new places that we liberate, we weren't really involved in organizing the local population to do that. So we didn't really have a lot of experience with that. I did learn a lot about myself and what I'm willing to what I'm able to endure in terms of like psychological stress and like physical stress. And I feel like it definitely helped motivate me to be stronger in like doing leftist activities and stuff like that, because prior to that I was like a socialist, and I did do some actions like in my hometown and this, that, or the other. But I wasn't like super motivated, you know. A lot of the times I'd be like, okay, I have this appointment right now, but I'd much rather do something personal for me. But after doing that, I feel like it kind of galvanized me a little bit to like do that. Yeah, I also think like I'm more able to take just like kind of like the shitty aspects of life. I definitely don't stress out as much. Just because I've had to deal with like those high stress situations, and I kind of developed a tolerance for it. So that's kind of how it changed me as a person. But in terms of organizing, it's like you're not really, Unless you put in your time in the military and build up a rapport with the Yepigé International guys, and then tell them, hey, I want to work in the civilian sector and organize people into communes, you're not really going to be involved with like getting people together in the civil society. But yes, let's continue. Okay, so yeah, what it means for the revolution is that, the sad fact is the SDF, they're very much outgunned, and they very much have way less resources, and part of their success is due to the fact that the U.S. intervened. It kills me to say that because I was anti-Iraq war, anti-Afghanistan back in the day, but they provided a lot of like material support and training support and this, that, or the other. So I feel like in some ways, like the SDF kind of has to rely on the U.S. as a crutch, at least from what I saw. But the good news is that the U.S. poured in so many weapons into the country that we're pretty well armed once they go away and cut off the supplies. So we've got like so many rifles. We got plenty of munitions. We've got a ton of like military vehicles. We got a ton of Humvees, a ton of Guardians. We got a ton of 50 cal gun emplacements. You would see Dushkas everywhere. So I think that their lasting legacy will be like, yeah, they gave us enough stuff to be well armed. But yeah, once those planes go away and they stop giving us aerial support, that's gonna, I feel like the SDF is gonna have to like change up how they do operations and try and work around that. It's definitely possible. It's definitely possible. If they don't reach an agreement with an outside power that would prevent Turkey from invading, and Turkey does end up invading, the chances of them maintaining control are very small. They are just incredibly outgunned. Turkey is the second largest military in NATO. They put a lot into their military because they are trying to create an imperialist project in that region of the world. So it's a huge uphill struggle. I think if Turkey ends up invading, that it's going to come down to a lot of insurgencies, guerrilla warfare, things like that, and there's going to be a lot of blood. Yes? We didn't really engage in guerrilla warfare. It was the warfare that we saw was not really insurgent and counterinsurgent like you saw in post-Saddam Iraq or in Afghanistan. There was definitely specific territory that was formerly under control of ISIS, and then there would be our side of the battlefield with them, and it would kind of be like, I guess, like World War II in a way, in the sense that you have like these fortified positions, and then you slowly like advance forward and try and take territory from them. That was sort of the characteristics once we got to Hajin and their last stronghold. But like even before that, it had that feeling to it. But instead of like trenches, it's old apartment buildings and old farmhouses and stuff like that. I think they got a pretty good capacity. For their APCs and stuff like that, they have a ton of like working garages, and they've got a ton of different spare parts that they can put into those. And they're incredibly wily, and they're very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? They know how to jury rig stuff and kind of improvise. So I think that'll be mostly okay. They have oil there. It's not processed, but I mean they can use that to get money and then get the supplies they need for those cars. And like weapons, we're constantly like finding weapons from ISIS caches and stuff like that, and there's no shortage of ammunition coming into the country. There will certainly be smugglers. I mean, there's smugglers right now bringing stuff in, so I don't see that changing. I think it'll be mostly okay. They don't really have like they don't have any planes at all to speak of to like that really need like specialized parts to maintain. So that's not really a problem. All right. Any more questions? Yes. IFB. I like them. I like them. A lot of people like to trash talk them as a bunch of book reading pansies that stay away from the fight and just discuss Marx and Lenin and stuff like that. But it's like I never actually saw them or met them or like went to their compounds or anything. They were kind of like ghosts there, so I don't really have a problem with them. Some of the people that I met that weren't going to be in Utopia and wanted to go to IFB during training, they seemed like decent folk. We were ideologically aligned and mostly agreed on stuff, and yeah, I like them. But I think they're doing good work. So for the conscripts and a lot of like the lower ranks, like soldiers that weren't like cadre, they would get shorter training sessions. So they would cut out the ideological part and they would just focus on like learning how to shoot a Kalashnikov. It'd be like 2 weeks and they'd be like, okay, go to the front. So like their ideological education was a lot less. Most of the time they're there. They're not there. They don't serve a dual purpose like the international volunteers do. Like they're just there to fight and protect their homes. We're there. They want us to go over there and experience the revolution and fight for the revolution and then come back and act as basically propaganda vessels, like spreading the propaganda around. So there's more importance put on the ideology in at least the training sessions. And whether or not you want to continue to develop your knowledge of that is up to you after you're done with that training and you're in the units and you're talking to the Kurds themselves. For like cadre guys that are PKK, they live that ideology. They are fully immersed in it and they become completely devoted to it. So they basically have to cut ties to their family. And they have to not take up relationships with other people. They can't father a family or mother a family or anything like that and just basically become self-sufficient people so that the people that they know aren't used as tools against them, like people in civilian life at least. So their education is, I would say, quite extensive. Like they're fully immersed in it, and they'll debate like certain aspects of the ideology amongst themselves and have discussions about that. Yes. See, I would say it's probably ripe for places in Central and South America. I mean, you've got the Zapatistas that are in Mexico, and they're like an anarchist thing, and I think they could like really get into a lot of the aspects of democratic confederalism. Yeah, like I would say Central and South America, those places are ripe for that. I would say places where centralized government has completely failed people, like in sub-Saharan Africa, I think that could be a place where you can potentially like sow the seeds for that kind of revolution. I think it could possibly like ring pretty well with Americans, at least when it comes to like the sort of like self-governing aspect, because there's this sort of culture here that big government is bad. You know, you constantly hear that on like TV or whatever, and there's like a big distrust of the federal government and like even like state governments and stuff like that. So I think with the right rhetoric, that can be twisted and used to our advantage to kind of like break into people's minds and kind of like get that started. But those are the three places that really come to mind. I can't really imagine any of the other places in the world being like super into that. So let's do 2 more questions. You? That's a really good question. It leans like compared to like volunteer militaries in the first world, it leans a bit older. It's kind of hard for me to gauge what the average age would be because there were people of all ages there. Youngest was 18. That's the absolute youngest you can come in there. But there was one French guy that I absolutely loved. He was a great man. Who came from France. His parents were from sub-Saharan Africa, and he basically reached maturity, and he was like, "Okay, I'm going. I'm joining the revolution." And I was like, "Damn, man! Like, don't you want to be an adult first for a little bit?" But he's really dedicated, and he's probably going to go back soon. And then like the oldest people that I saw there, I didn't really specifically ask their age, but they were like 50 or so, I would say. Michael Enright, he's a very famous volunteer that's been over there a couple of times, and he's an actor. He's originally from Britain, and he's pretty old. He's like 50-ish, gray hair, kind of what's that? That's young. I disagree, but okay. But he's over there. He's a very flamboyant personality. But Utopia takes people of all ages, pretty much. Saw a couple people that were 40-ish that were there. A bunch of people in their 30s. I'm in my 30s, and I went over there. And a bunch of people in their like 20s. Mm-hmm. One more question. Yes. Yeah, I think if there's a Turkish invasion, it's also going to be followed with an encircling of Rojava. I feel like Turkish soldiers will enter into Iraqi Kurdistan and cut off like routes into the country from there, because I'm sure they know that is happening. That's how they get supplies and stuff like that, and they want to choke out the YPG. So in my opinion, I feel like if there is a Turkish invasion, they are probably going to do that, and then the flow of bodies in and out of the country is going to stop. So if you do end up there and there is a Turkish invasion, there is a very, very high chance that you are not returning home. So definitely keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that this is, if you're thinking about going, that this is a very, very dangerous place. And there is a very good chance that you will die. So in my opinion, you should definitely come to terms with the possibility of your death before you sign up and go there. Otherwise, you'll be racked with psychological problems. You'll probably be racked by fear. But yeah. If you want to go there and fight Turkey, just realize coming home is probably not an option. Okay, I think that's it. I thank you guys for coming out. I love talking about this stuff. And yeah, I hope you have a good evening. We got stuff back there if you want to buy it. I'll be more than happy to talk with you after this if you want to chat. But thank you.